to get used to this body of mine because I can't do things the way I used to do them. I can't see ahead.
NBC's Katie Engelhardt joins us right now. And Katie, thank you for sharing that piece with us. Such a snapshot of their humanity. They are suffering economically, physically, and emotionally.
Mm-hmm. And financially.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, this is part of a larger healthcare story. I published a longer version of this report on NBC Left Field's YouTube page, and a lot of the commenters suggested that these women should be able to, buck up, pull themselves up by their bootstraps. The reality is, according to federal data, about half of Americans could not come up with just $400 in the event of a medical emergency. So this is a systemic issue. Medical emergencies bankrupt Americans all the time.
Well, we're looking at some of the video that is so tough to watch a year later. Are they still going through PTSD? No doubt.
They certainly are. Some of the victims have been getting help from a local organization, paying for mental health counseling, but that local organization is quickly running out of funding. Now, there is some federal compensation available to victims through the Victims of Crime Act, but it can be really hard to access that funding. It can take a lot of time, and a year later, it hasn't come through for a lot of the survivors. They feel like they've been left to fend for themselves.
Did they know about what's happening today? Another protest? And quickly here, if you can, 30 seconds for us. What was the reaction to that? What was the mood?
They were certainly aware of it, and all of the women I spoke to had avoided downtown Charlottesville since the event. What was really striking to me is that some of the victims weren't even familiar with the name James Fields Jr., the alleged driver behind that car attack. So for them, the experience is very different. I think for us, a lot of the attention has been put on the perpetrators and not enough attention on the victim experience.
Katie Engelhardt, thank you for your reporting.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. And of course, you can see the longer version of that. Take a look at the longer documentary version of Katie's report. You can go to NBC Left Field the YouTube channel, and then tonight also on the 1-year mark of the deadly clash between protesters and white nationalists in Charlottesville, which we've been watching. MSNBC shares a story of a former white supremacist who has dedicated his life to reforming others. Watch Breaking Hate tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern on MSNBC. Be right back.
The first person to survive Alzheimer's disease is out there. And the Alzheimer's Association is going to make it happen by funding scientific breakthroughs, advancing public policy, and providing local support to those living with the disease and their caregivers. But we won't get there without you. Join the fight with the Alzheimer's Association.
No. Cancel, please.
Being in the know is a good thing. That's why Discover will alert you if your social security number is found on any one of thousands of risky sites.
In an era of online retail, Carvana's made it easy for you to browse, buy, and even trade in your old car 100% online. We'll even deliver your new car, or you can pick it up, and give you a 7-day return policy. So kick back, relax, and enjoy the new way to buy a car at Carvana.
In the early 80s, 2 guys were born. Their names were Jeff and Andy. They grew up, developed facial hair, and one day, while buying razors, they wondered,
why do razors cost so much?
Jeff and Andy were confused, so they started their own razor company. They even bought a factory in Germany.
They bought my factory.
They made razors that looked like they were designed on Earth, not in space. And by manufacturing the razors themselves, Harry's is able to offer a quality shave at a fraction of the price. Go to harrys.com now to get started. Harry's, the shaving company that's fixing shaving.
I'm really big on knowing why I'm doing something based on some kind of science, and I'm always looking for those kind of things that can help me progress forward as just a healthy person and as an athlete.
Know more about you and your DNA at 23andme.com.
Booking a flight at the last minute doesn't have to be expensive. Just go to Priceline. It's the best place to book a flight a few days before my trip and still save up to 40%. Just tap and go. For the best savings on flights, go to Priceline.
Ooh, heaven is a place on earth.
I didn't believe it. Again.
Ooh, baby, do you know what that's worth?
I want to believe it.
Ooh.
I'm not hearing the confidence. Okay, hold the name your price tool. Power of options based on your budget. And
we'll make heaven a place on earth.
My angels.
Ooh, heaven is a place on earth.
Spectrum Internet delivers faster download speeds and better performance. Our fiber-rich network connects hundreds of millions of devices. Now there's Spectrum Internet Ultra with 400 megabits per second and Spectrum Internet Gig with speeds up to 940 megabits per second, delivering the bandwidth you need for online gaming, streaming video, and more for multiple users all at the same time. Upgrade your speed today for as little as $20 more a month. Spectrum Internet.
You've got your whole life wrapped up in these decisions. What you have is more than just your retirement. It represents the fruit of your life's work. You need someone you can trust to guide you through these difficult decisions. For more than 35 years, Kohler Financial Group has been helping their customers work through the confusion associated with retirement. We're a family-run business focused on community, relationships, and individual needs. Kohler Financial Group. Take the first step. Call today.
Well, this is the part of the show when Yasmin Vasugian usually does her share for the week, and today a very special share from Yasmin, although she's not here. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the newest member of our MSNBC team. Yasmin giving birth to this little guy last week. His name is Noor Ahad. He was named Ahad after Yasmin's father. Little Noor joins big brother Azur. And mom and baby, they're doing just well. Just fine. And well wishes to them from your weekend news team. We can look at those pictures all day, David Gura. Yasmin, congratulations. And David Gura is going to pick it up from here on that very note. Man, that's a home run for you there, my friend.
Absolutely. I was co-anchoring with her early in the morning this week. When she didn't show up Thursday, I thought something might have happened. Richard, thank you very much. I'm David Gura here at MSNBC headquarters in New York. Eamon has the night off, and we want to get right to what is happening in Washington, D.C. at this very moment. Within the last few hours, white nationalists kicked off their rally in Lafayette Park directly across from the White House. It's the same group from last year's rally in Charlottesville. They are actually celebrating that event that left one young woman dead. Well, the small group is being met with a much larger crowd of counter-protesters with police in Washington out in force to try to keep the peace there. NBC's Garrett Hake is on the ground for us in Washington. Garrett, help us here with the numbers. As I said, just a couple of dozen protesters there who are white nationalists, white supremacists gathered in that park. Contrast that with those who are protesting against this group.
Yeah, David, gathered, but maybe gathered in the past tense. It's looking like this whole endeavor might be over hours earlier than we expected it to, in part because it started raining, thundering, and lightning out here, and in part, as you mentioned, by the fact that this rally really wasn't much of a rally to speak about. There was about maybe 24, maybe 20 attendees of this Unite the Right rally version 2. This had been the endeavor in Charlottesville last year. This time around, what we saw was a group that was largely leaderless, largely disorganized. A lot of these folks coming in on the Metro didn't even have Metro cards in advance. They didn't have a coherent message. And they were met when they got here by a huge counter-protest of folks who had all of those things. They had a message. They had a united voice. And they have big-time numbers. If you look around here, this is the scene that will meet those folks from the Unite the Right group. If and when they start to leave, this will not be a welcoming crowd. You see Black Lives Matter flags. There's also a large Antifa contingent here. They have been essentially patrolling this street over the last 2 hours, waiting for these rally-goers to come back out at the end of their rally. The words have not been kind, David, and the hope among police, among organizers here, is that all of this stays with words here, as those maybe 24 protesters will be escorted by a much larger group of police, like we saw when they arrived here earlier today. So again, in summation of what we saw today, an overwhelming messaging victory by the counter-protesters who said, we do not stand for hate, we do not stand for racism, we do not want you on the streets of Washington, D.C. Now the hope is, with this concluding earlier, it appears, than many people expected, and in the daylight hours still, it will conclude without violence, without confrontation, and without anything that might mar, at least from the counter-protester perspective here, what was an effective day, making clear that this kind of language, this kind of hate from these rally goers just simply won't be tolerated here.
All right, Garrett Haake, my colleague Garrett Haake, they're right outside the old executive office building right next to the White House in Washington, D.C., where that protest was taking place. He's using the past tense. Let me go to Mike Vaquera now, who is also in Lafayette Plaza. And, Mike, let me ask you to play off of that, if you would. Garrett saying this was a small group. It has begun to dissipate. What are you seeing from your vantage point?
Well, David, it appears that it's all over but the shouting here. This group that was supposed to really start this rally in earnest, as Garrett was saying, at about 5:30, they got here early. They're leaving early. Perhaps it's got something to do with the skies that are starting to open up in Washington. Perhaps it's because they had their say, as we've been talking about over the course of the last several hours. And there you see some of the police leaving. It appears that they have an escort. They did not have an escort when they came in, an escort such as the one that we're seeing now. But this does appear to be breaking up, and again, well ahead of schedule. If it stands as it stands right now, no confrontation, as Garrett and Jeff and I have been talking about over the course of the afternoon. An incredibly large turnout, at least compared to the 24 or so of the Kessler group, the so-called white nationalists. Many times that. I'm going to call the crowd maybe 2,000. Gathered at the north side of Lafayette Park. They were shouting consistently, protesting the presence of these people. Meanwhile, on the other side of the park, Jason Kessler and some of his colleagues and adherents held forth before the cameras. There were more press here than there were those followers of Jason Kessler. We talked to a couple of the individuals who came here with Kessler, part of the so-called white nationalist group. I asked why, in fact, the group was so small. Because they're afraid, they said, because of the backlash that they experienced after Charlottesville. Many of them here had their faces covered. They obviously think that they were in some kind of danger. So, as you can see, a police presence. It appears they've been escorted off the grounds, the White House grounds, to the west towards 17th Street here. And it appears this may be over without incident. An incredible turnout by the counter-protesters here, shouting across the park, almost drowning out Kessler and some of his fellow speakers who had amplified sound, who were speaking through loudspeakers. So a day that is perhaps anticlimactic in its ending. David.
My colleague Mike Vaquera there on Lafayette Plaza. What we're seeing now are images from Pennsylvania Avenue and I think 16th or 17th Street in Washington, D.C. You see a bunch of counter-protesters there getting into what looks like a small conflict with some of the law enforcement who gathered in Washington, D.C. I should say this was an effort not unlike what you see in Washington. With
rally goers back out to the metro station. These Antifa folks don't want to let that happen. They have completely blocked off the exit here on this side. And even as I'm speaking, I'm seeing more things being thrown at the police officers. From my vantage point, David, I can't actually see any of the Unite the Right rally goers back there. They're probably at least 20 or 30 feet back behind the cops, if they're even that close. Certainly not within range of anything being thrown by these protesters. So, once again, unfortunately, this is exactly the kind of scene that organizers here had hoped to avoid, and now it appears entirely inevitable. I don't know how police are going to move these folks back, other than by physically doing it the old-fashioned way, or by finding another way out of this complex.
Garrett, explain what's going to happen here next. You rode the metro into Washington, D.C. from Northern Virginia with a number of these white supremacist protesters. They got to Foggy Bottom, a little bit west of where you are now. They made their way on foot to Lafayette Plaza. Just explain what has to happen next here, and maybe tell us a little bit about that police presence. We're talking about a pretty small space in Washington, D.C. Lafayette Plaza is not a huge park by any measure.
No, Lafayette Park's only a few acres, and the surrounding part of the White House campus that they've locked down just adds probably another acre or two to it. You should be looking at pictures, I think, now of some of these Antifa protesters. I'm seeing a guy in a black motorcycle helmet shooting off a Roman candle over the line of cops here. It's impossible for me to say, David, what, if anything, that accomplishes for what had been a non-violent counter-protest here and a message they'd been trying to get across. Behind me, I'm seeing more and more of these Antifa protesters lined up. David, the bottom line here is these folks who came in, these 24 or so Unite the Right protesters, they've got to get out of here somehow. They're not sleeping at the White House tonight. And it appears as Antifa protesters have decided to make that as hard as humanly possible. Now, Washington, D.C. police, I will say now, as this begins to get weird, have a reputation of being essentially the best in the world at this. Nobody deals with more protests bigger protests more often than D.C. police. But most of the time, those protests are pretty well organized. They're put together by established groups. They're put together by groups who want to move 1 million people through the city, and they want to do it in a non-violent fashion. That's essentially the exact opposite of what we have here. We've got 20 people who need to get moved through the city in a non-violent fashion, and where I